What happens when a man with all the money in the world tries to humiliate a woman he thinks has nothing? In the heart of New York City, inside one of its most exclusive restaurants, a billionaire dripping with contempt decided to mock his waitress in a language he assumed she wouldn't understand. He whispered his venom in French, a cruel joke meant for his companion's ears alone. But he made one catastrophic mistake. The waitress, a woman he saw as less than dust, didn't just understand him. She froze, not from fear, but from recognition. And in that moment, she unleashed a secret that would not only shatter his pride, but dismantle his entire empire. The air in Ethelgard wasn't just air. It was a carefully curated atmosphere. It smelled of money, old money to be precise, a subtle blend of lemon oil from the polished mahogany-aged leather from the banquettes, and the faintest, most expensive whisper of truffle oil wafting from the kitchen. From its perch on the 65th floor, the restaurant offered a view of Central Park that was itself a declaration of power. Only the city's elite could afford to look down on the world from such a height. And among the staff who moved like silent phantoms through this gilded cage, there was Clara Moreau. To the patrons, Clara was just part of the scenery. 26 years old, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and dark hair pulled back into a severe professional knot, she was impeccably efficient. Her movements were economical, her smile polite but distant, her presence deliberately unobtrusive. She refilled water glasses before they were half empty and cleared plates with a ghost-like grace. She was in every respect the perfect waitress for a place like Ethelgard, visible only when needed, invisible otherwise. But beneath the starched white shirt and black apron beat the heart of a fallen princess. Clara Moreau wasn't born to serve. She was born to be served. Her father, Jean-Luc Moreau, had been one of the world's most respected art historians and curators, a man whose word could double the value of a Renaissance painting. Her mother, Hélène, was the daughter of a French diplomat, raised in chateaux with sprawling gardens. Clara's childhood had been a whirlwind of museum galas, summers in Provence, and lessons in fencing, piano, and 3 languages. French was not a subject she had learned. It was the language of her lullabies, the tongue in which her parents whispered their love and their arguments. Then 5 years ago, the gilded world had shattered. Jean-Luc Moreau was accused of orchestrating one of the biggest art forgery scandals in modern history. A newly discovered masterpiece, a supposed work by the Dutch master Vermeer, titled The Alchemist's Daughter, was declared authentic on his authority. He staked his entire reputation on it. 6 months later, irrefutable scientific evidence proved it was a brilliant but modern fake. The fallout was catastrophic. Jean-Luc was publicly disgraced, his career obliterated. His friends in high society vanished overnight. The legal fees and penalties devoured their fortune. The man who had once commanded auction houses with a nod was now a pariah. But the true devastation was the accusation itself. He swore he was innocent, that he had been set up, that the evidence against him was manipulated. He pointed fingers at a rival, a man he'd done business with, a ruthless up-and-comer in the corporate world who had a vested interest in the painting's sale. But no one listened. The evidence was stacked, the media narrative was set, and Jean-Luc Moreau was the villain. The stress, the shame, the sheer weight of it all broke him. A massive stroke left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak clearly, his brilliant mind trapped in a failing body. Clara, then just 21, and a promising art history student at Columbia, dropped out to care for him and her heartbroken mother. Hélène, never equipped for hardship, withered. She developed a chronic illness that required expensive medication. The last of their assets were sold off including their beloved brownstone. Clara took the first job she could get that paid well enough to cover the rent on their cramped Queen's apartment and her mother's prescriptions, a waitress at Ethelgard. It was a bitter irony. Every night she served the same kind of people who had once been her family's peers, the people who had turned their backs on them without a second thought. She listened to them boast about their acquisitions and summer homes, her face a mask of polite servitude, her soul burning with a cold, quiet rage. Her only confidant at the restaurant was Sophia, another waitress with a sharp tongue and a kind heart. "I don't know how you do it, Clara," Sophia said one evening as they polished silverware in the back. "You have the patience of a saint. If Mr. Henderson from Table 4 clicked his fingers at me one more time, I was going to stab him with a butter knife." Clara offered a faint smile. "Patience is a weapon, Soph. You just have to know when to use it." She held up a fork, inspecting it for smudges. The reflection showed a tired-looking young woman, but her eyes held a fire that no amount of hardship had been able to extinguish. She wasn't just waiting tables, she was waiting for a chance, any chance to reclaim her father's honor. That chance was about to walk through the door. It was a Tuesday night, typically slower, but a reservation had been made under a name that sent a ripple of energy through the staff, Damien Sterling. Mr. Dubois, the severe French manager who ran Ethelgard with military precision, briefed the staff. "Mr. Sterling is one of the most important investors in the restaurant group. He is particular. Everything must be perfect. No mistakes. Clara, you will take the table. Your professionalism is unmatched." Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. She knew the name. Damien Sterling was a titan of finance, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing. His face was a regular feature in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He was known for his aggressive takeovers, his lavish lifestyle, and his notoriously short temper. He was the epitome of new money, desperate to cloak himself in the trappings of the old world. When he arrived, he was exactly as she'd pictured. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit with a ridiculously expensive Patek Philippe watch on his wrist that seemed to scream its own price tag. His hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile was a predatory slash of white teeth. On his arm was a woman who looked more like an accessory than a person, stunningly beautiful, painfully thin, and wearing a dress that cost more than Clara's annual rent. Her name was Isabel. Sterling party of two. He announced to the hostess, not with the tone of a guest arriving, but of a king entering his court. They were seated at the best table, the corner banquette, with the panoramic view. It fell within Clara's section. As she approached, she felt a familiar knot of resentment tighten in her stomach. He was just another arrogant peacock, another man who saw her as nothing more than a pair of hands to bring him his food. "Good evening," Clara said, her voice calm and even. "My name is Clara, and I will be your server this evening. May I start you with some water?" Damien didn't even look at her. He was busy showing Isabel something on his phone. He simply waved a dismissive hand. "Get us the 98 Petrus, and don't shake it." It was an order, not a request. Clara knew the wine. It was $12,000 a bottle. "An excellent choice, sir," she said, maintaining her composure. She turned to Isabel. "And for you, madam." Isabel looked up from the phone, momentarily confused, as if she hadn't expected to be spoken to. "Oh, I'll have what he's having." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could hear Damien's voice, a low rumble of arrogance. He was boasting about a recent acquisition, a rival company he'd gutted and sold for parts. He spoke of people's livelihoods as if they were numbers on a spreadsheet. Clara returned with the wine, presenting it to him, as per protocol. He glanced at the label with a cursory nod, the gesture of a man performing a role he'd learned from movies. "Open it." She performed the ritual with practiced expertise, the clean cut of the foil, the silent twist of the corkscrew, the perfect pour into the decanter. Her hands were steady, betraying none of the contempt she felt. She poured a small amount for him to taste. He swirled it, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. "Acceptable," he declared, as if he were granting the wine a pardon. For the next hour, Clara served them in near silence, moving in and out of their bubble of wealth and privilege. They ignored her completely, their conversation revolving around yachts, galas, and the vapid gossip of their social circle. Damien did most of the talking, his voice a constant stream of self-aggrandizement. Then he ordered the beluga caviar, another ostentatious display. As Clara placed the mother-of-pearl spoons on the table, Damien glanced at her for the first time, but his eyes didn't see a person. They saw an object, a prop in his performance. He leaned towards Isabel, a conspiratorial smirk on his face. He lowered his voice, believing he was creating a private, impenetrable space between them. And then he began to speak in French, a language he clearly thought was his secret weapon, a mark of his superior culture. His accent was atrocious, a clumsy, butchered version of the beautiful language Clara had grown up with. But the words were clear as a bell. "Regarde cette pauvre petite chose," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at this poor little thing. Elle travaille si dur pour quelques miettes. She works so hard for a few crumbs. Je me demande si elle a jamais goûté à quelque chose de meilleur que les restes de la cuisine. I wonder if she's ever tasted anything better than scraps from the kitchen." Isabel giggled a high-pitched, vacuous sound. "Oh, Damien, you're awful." "C'est la vie, mon chou," he continued, thoroughly enjoying himself. "That's life, my sweet. Il y a nous, et puis il y a eux. There are people like us, and then there are people like them. She probably lives in some miserable little box in a borough I wouldn't even drive through." Clara stood perfectly still. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz from the speakers faded into a dull roar in her ears. Her breath caught in her chest. Every muscle in her body went rigid. It wasn't just the insult. She'd heard worse, endured worse. It was something else. It was his voice, that specific cadence of arrogance. It was the mention of people like us and people like them. It was a phrase that echoed in the dark recesses of her memory. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, and a scene from 5 years ago flashed through her mind. Her father, his face pale with fury, standing in his study after a phone call. That man, he had seethed to her mother. That man, Damien Sterling. He thinks there are 2 types of people in this world. People like us, he said, and people like them, and he believes he can buy and sell people like them for sport. Damien Sterling, the man who had been her father's business partner in the Vermeer deal, the man her father had accused of setting him up, the man whose name had been a curse whispered in her house for 5 long years. He was here, mocking her, in her mother's native tongue. The blood drained from her face and then rushed back with the force of a tidal wave. The silver tray in her hand felt impossibly heavy. The world narrowed to this one man, this one table. The years of quiet suffering, of swallowed pride, of seeing her family destroyed, coalesced into a single white-hot point of clarity. This wasn't just an insult. This was destiny. Damien, oblivious, took another sip of his obscenely expensive wine. He looked up at her, expecting to see the blank, servile expression of a nobody. He saw her freeze. He saw the color shift in her face. He smirked, assuming his French had somehow registered, as a foreign, confusing sound, making the little waitress malfunction. He was about to make another cutting remark to Isabel, but he never got the chance. Clara's posture straightened. She lifted her chin, and the subservient mask she had worn for 5 years dissolved, replaced by an expression of cold, aristocratic fury. The humble waitress vanished, and in her place stood the daughter of Jean-Luc and Hélène Moreau. She leaned forward, not enough to be improper, but enough to command his full attention. Her voice, when it came out, was not the quiet, deferential tone of a server. It was low, flawless, and resonant with the pure Parisian accent of the French elite, an accent that made his own attempt sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Monsieur," she began the single word, cutting through the air like a shard of ice. Damien Sterling's smirk faltered. His eyes widened slightly. Isabel stopped giggling. Clara continued, her sea-storm eyes locked on his. "Si vous souhaitez critiquer ma situation en français, je vous suggère d'abord de maîtriser la langue au-delà du niveau d'un touriste cherchant les toilettes. If you wish to critique my circumstances in French, I suggest you first master the language beyond the level of a tourist asking for the bathroom." Damien's jaw went slack. The wine glass in his hand trembled. He was utterly, completely frozen. He understood every single perfectly enunciated word. But Clara wasn't finished. She pressed her advantage, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with venom. "Votre accent est aussi maladroit que vos manières. Et quant à ce que j'ai goûté ou non, sachez que j'ai été élevé dans un monde dont vous ne faites que porter le costume. Your accent is as clumsy as your manners. And as for what I have or have not tasted, know that I was raised in a world for which you only wear the costume." She held his stunned, panicked gaze for a beat longer, letting the weight of her words land. The silence at the table was absolute. Isabel looked back and forth between them, her face a mask of complete confusion. Then, with a poise that was nothing short of breathtaking, Clara straightened up, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and said in perfect professional English, "Please enjoy your caviar, sir." And she turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving Damien Sterling sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He wasn't just mocked, he was exposed, and in his eyes Clara saw something more than just humiliation. She saw fear. He hadn't just been outsmarted by a waitress. He had been recognized by a ghost from the past he thought he had buried forever. The walk from Damien Sterling's table to the sanctuary of the kitchen felt like traversing a chasm. Clara's legs moved on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her hands tremble, but her resolve was forged in steel. She pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic symphony of the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, the shouted orders of the chefs, and it was like coming up for air after being held underwater. Sophia was by the service station, inputting an order. She took one look at Clara's face, and her eyes widened. "Clara, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Clara breathed, leaning against the cold stainless steel counter. "I've seen a monster." Before she could explain, the kitchen door swung open with such force that it slammed against the rubber stopper. Mr. Dubois, the manager, stood in the doorway, his normally placid face a thundercloud. His eyes scanned the kitchen and locked onto Clara. "Moreau, my office. Now," he barked. A hush fell over the kitchen staff. A summons to Dubois' office mid-shift meant one thing: termination. Sophia shot Clara a panicked look. Clara, however, felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Getting fired was the least of her worries now. Everything had changed. She followed Dubois into his cramped, windowless office. He closed the door behind them and gestured sharply to the chair opposite his desk. He sat down, steepled his fingers, and fixed her with a hard stare. "Explain," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Mr. Sterling is one of our most significant patrons. He has just informed the hostess that he is leaving, that he has been egregiously insulted by his server, and that he will be speaking to the ownership group tomorrow morning. He demands your immediate dismissal. So I will ask you one time, Clara. What did you do?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I spoke to him in French." Dubois' eyebrows shot up. As a native of Lyon, he was proud of his heritage. "You spoke to him in French? What could you possibly have said in French to provoke such a reaction?" This was the moment. She could lie down, play it, try to save her job, or she could tell the truth. The choice was easy. "He was speaking about me to his companion." Clara began, her voice steady. "He assumed because I am a waitress that I was uneducated and would not understand. He called me a poor little thing who survives on scraps from the kitchen. He mocked my presumed social status. His French was, to be frank, atrocious." Dubois listened, his expression shifting from anger to intense curiosity. "And your reply—" "My reply," Clara said, her voice, taking on the same icy precision she had used at the table, was delivered in the French my mother taught me. I suggested that if he wished to insult someone in a language, he should endeavor to learn it properly first. I told him his accent was as clumsy as his manners, and I informed him that I was raised in the world he merely pretends to be a part of. A long silence filled the small office. Mr. Dubois stared at her, not as a manager looking at an errant employee, but as a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, unreadable expression dawning on his face. He had always recognized a certain refinement in Clara, a grace that went beyond mere professional training. Now the pieces were clicking into place. "Moreau," he said, her surname sounding different now, more formal. "What is your story?" "My father is Jean-Luc Moreau," she said simply. The name landed in the room with the weight of a dropped statue. Dubois' eyes widened in recognition. Anyone in the world of high culture, especially a Frenchman like himself, knew that name. Jean-Luc Moreau, the brilliant curator, the tragic scandal. "Mon Dieu," Dubois breathed, looking at her as if for the first time. "The art historian." "The same," Clara confirmed. "And Damien Sterling is the man who destroyed him. He was my father's partner on the Vermeer deal. My father was convinced Sterling framed him, silencing him, just as he was about to expose the painting as a forgery himself. Sterling bought the masterpiece for a pittance after the scandal, and it now hangs in his private collection as a trophy of his victory." The full horrifying scope of the evening's confrontation settled upon Dubois. It wasn't a waitress snapping at a rude customer. It was an act of long-simmering justice. It was a daughter defending her father's honor against the very man who had ruined him. He was quiet for a long time, tapping a pen on his desk. "Mr. Sterling has immense power," he said, finally, his voice now laced with concern. "He could cause significant trouble for this restaurant. For me. For you." "I know," Clara said. "I'm prepared to leave. I understand the position I've put you in." Dubois shook his head slowly. "No, you don't understand." He stood up and walked to the door. He opened it and looked out at the bustling kitchen, then back at her. "For 5 years I have run this establishment based on a single principle: excellence. Mr. Sterling, for all his money, is a vulgar man who appreciates only the price of things, not their value. He ordered a 98 Petrus and drank it like it was grape juice." He let out a short, sharp sigh. "You, Mademoiselle Moreau, possess a quality that money cannot buy: class, integrity." He looked her straight in the eye. To hell with Damien Sterling. You are not fired. Take the rest of the night off, on full pay. Go home and be with your family." Clara was stunned into silence. She had expected dismissal, not solidarity. A wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brought tears to her eyes, washed over her. "Monsieur, I thank you." "Nonsense," he said with a dismissive wave, though a flicker of a smile touched his lips. "He insulted you in my native tongue. Consider it a matter of national pride." He paused. "And Clara, be careful. A man like Sterling, when humiliated, does not simply walk away. He retaliates." Clara left Ethelgard and stepped out into the cool night air of Columbus Circle. The city lights, usually a source of oppressive anonymity, seemed to sparkle with possibility tonight. The confrontation had been like a lightning strike, illuminating a path forward that had been shrouded in darkness for 5 long years. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Patience is a weapon, but it is useless without a target. Tonight, she had found her target. The subway ride to Queens was a blur. When she arrived at their small 3rd-floor walk-up, the smell of lavender and old books greeted her. She found her mother, Helene, asleep in an armchair in the living room, a thin blanket pulled over her lap, an open book of French poetry resting on her chest. Helene looked so fragile, a pale shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Clara gently took the book, placed a bookmark in it, and draped the blanket more securely around her mother's shoulders. The sight of her mother's quiet suffering solidified the new, dangerous resolve taking root in her heart. In the small room that served as her father's bedroom and study, she found him awake, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. The stroke had stolen his words, but not the intelligence in his eyes. He turned his head as she entered, and his gaze was sharp, questioning. He could always tell when something was wrong, or in this case, when something was different. She knelt by his wheelchair, taking his good hand in hers. "Papa," she said softly. "I saw him tonight. Damien Sterling." Her father's hand convulsed in hers. A low, guttural sound of frustration and rage escaped his lips, one of the few sounds he could still make. His eyes burned with a fire she hadn't seen in years. "He was at the restaurant," Clara continued, her voice low and intense. "He tried to humiliate me. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. And Papa, I didn't stay silent." She recounted the entire exchange, word for word, in French. As she spoke, she watched her father's face. The frustration gave way to shock, then to something else, a fierce, blazing pride. A single tear tracked its way down his wrinkled cheek. When she finished, he squeezed her hand with surprising strength, his eyes conveying everything his voice could not good. "It has begun." For the first time in 5 years, Clara felt not like a victim of circumstance, but an agent of her own destiny. Dubois' warning echoed in her head. A man like Sterling retaliates. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the opening salvo of a war she had just declared. Sterling wouldn't just try to get her fired now, he would try to crush her. He couldn't afford to have a ghost with the name Moreau walking around New York, especially one who wasn't afraid of him. She went to her own small room and pulled out a worn, leather-bound trunk from under her bed. Inside was the wreckage of her former life photographs, university textbooks, and at the very bottom, a collection of her father's notebooks. These weren't his published works, but his private research journals, filled with his elegant looping script detailing his thoughts, his discoveries, his doubts. She had packed them away because looking at them was too painful. Now she opened them with a new purpose. She spent the rest of the night poring over the entries from the months leading up to the scandal. She read about his initial excitement over The Alchemist's Daughter, his meticulous examination of the canvas, the pigments, the craquelure. And then she found it, an entry dated 2 weeks before the scandal broke. Her father's handwriting was agitated sharper than usual. "Something is wrong with the lead tin yellow," he had written. "The particle composition, it's too uniform, almost unnaturally so. It's consistent with the 17th century, but it lacks the subtle, almost imperceptible inclusions of silica one would expect from the milling process of the era. It feels manufactured, perfect in a way that feels false." She read on, her heart pounding. "I raised my preliminary concerns with Damien today. He dismissed them out of hand. 'You're being paranoid, Jean-Luc,' he said. 'This is our golden goose. Don't ruin it with academic fussiness.' His eagerness to rush to authentication is unseemly. It feels less like passion for the art and more like pure avarice. He's already pre-sold shares in the painting to a consortium of investors. If this painting is revealed as a fake before the public sale, he will be ruined and exposed as a fraud." The final chilling entry on the subject was from 2 days before his public disgrace. "I am certain now. It's a forgery. A masterful one, but a forgery nonetheless. There's a particular technique in the underdrawing of the girl's sleeve, a cross-hatching style, that is a signature of a known 20th century forger, Han van Meegeren's most gifted student. I have a sample ready to send for independent spectrographic analysis. I will confront Damien with my full findings tomorrow morning. The truth must come out." He never got the chance. The next day, an anonymous tip led investigators to a Swiss bank account, opened in her father's name, with a multi-million-dollar deposit traced back to the sellers of the painting. The independent analysis he had commissioned was mysteriously intercepted and replaced with a doctored report confirming the painting's authenticity. He was framed perfectly and completely. Clara closed the journal, her hands shaking. This was it. This was the proof. It wasn't just her father's word against Sterling's. It was his contemporaneous documented research. Sterling hadn't just profited from the scandal. He had orchestrated it to stop her father from exposing him. He'd pre-sold shares in a painting he knew might be fake, a massive act of fraud. A cold, hard plan began to form in her mind. A public confrontation was not enough. Humiliating him was not enough. She had to dismantle him. She had to take away everything he had built on the ashes of her family's name. And she knew just how to do it. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. Dubois just got off the phone. Said it was the big boss. "You're not fired, but you're on indefinite paid leave. He said to tell you to lay low." Sounds more like a warning to me. Be careful, C. Lay low. It was good advice. It was also advice she had no intention of taking. Laying low was what she had done for 5 years. The time for hiding was over. The time for hunting had begun. She looked at her father's journal, then at her own reflection in the dark window. The waitress was gone. In her place was Clara Moreau, and she was coming for Damien Sterling, with a weapon far more powerful than money, the truth. The indefinite paid leave was a gilded cage, a temporary sanctuary bought by Mr. Dubois' courage. Clara knew it wouldn't last. Damien Sterling was not a man to forgive or forget a public humiliation. He would investigate the waitress who had so thoroughly flayed him. He would dig until he unearthed the name Moreau, and the moment he did, his fear would ignite a far more dangerous fire. Her time was running out. She didn't waste a second. Her cramped Queen's apartment became the headquarters of a one-woman insurgency. The years of quiet grief were over, replaced by a cold, energizing fury. She unearthed the leather trunk containing the last vestiges of her father's academic life, his private research journals. For 5 years they had been monuments to her pain. Now they were an arsenal. With a methodical focus she hadn't felt since her university days, she devoured the entries from the months leading up to the scandal. She read of her father's initial awe at The Alchemist's Daughter, his meticulous notes on its composition, and then the dawning, sickening realization that something was wrong. She found the key passage, the one that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Her father's script sharp with agitation. Something is wrong with the lead tin yellow. It lacks the subtle inclusions of silica. It feels manufactured. I raised my concerns with Damien today. He dismissed them. "This is our golden goose, Jean-Luc," he said. "Don't ruin it." His avarice is alarming. He has already pre-sold shares in the painting to investors. If this is a fake, he isn't just a fool. He's a fraud. The final entry, dated just 2 days before his public ruin, was the smoking gun. I am certain now. It's a forgery. A masterful one, but a forgery. The underdrawing of the sleeve, it contains a cross-hatching style, a signature of a known 20th century forger. I have a sample ready for independent analysis. I will confront Damien with my full findings tomorrow. Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with vindication. This was the proof. Her father was on the verge of exposing Sterling's massive financial fraud when Sterling had framed him, turning the truth on its head. But a journal, however damning, wasn't enough. It was her word, the word of a bitter daughter, against a billionaire's. She needed an ally, someone with unimpeachable credibility, someone known for hunting monsters like Sterling. Her mind immediately seized on one name, Arthur Finch. A lion of investigative journalism, Finch had been forced into retirement from the New York Ledger, but his reputation for dismantling corrupt financiers was legendary. Crucially, she remembered a single skeptical article he'd written about her father's case years ago, questioning the convenient perfection of the narrative against him. He had seen the masterpiece of misdirection. Finding him was a challenge. He was a ghost in the digital age. An old press club directory finally led her to a dusty, cavernous bookstore in the East Village called The Final Word. A small bell announced her entry into a maze of towering, precarious stacks of books. Behind a counter that served as a fortress against the world sat a man with rumpled clothes, thinning grey hair, and the deeply cynical eyes of someone who had seen humanity's worst. "We close in 5 minutes," he grumbled, not bothering to look up from his newspaper. "Mr. Finch," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Clara Moreau. My father was Jean-Luc Moreau." The newspaper lowered slowly. Arthur Finch's pale blue eyes, magnified by his spectacles, appraised her with piercing intensity. I remember the name. The story's old and cold. "What do you want?" "I want to reignite it," she replied, stepping forward and placing her father's journal on the counter between them. This is his private journal from right before the scandal. It proves he knew the Vermeer was a fake. It proves Damien Sterling had a multi-million-dollar motive to silence him and frame him. Finch's bored facade cracked, replaced by the keen, predatory interest of a reporter, smelling blood. He opened the journal with a reverence for evidence that Clara deeply appreciated. His finger traced the elegant script. "A diary can be dismissed," he rasped, testing her. "Sterling will claim your father wrote it after the fact to save himself." "He had a stroke 5 years ago, Mr. Finch. He hasn't been able to write his own name since," Clara countered coolly. "The entries are dated. They are his real-time thoughts. And more importantly, he mentions a specific piece of evidence, a forger's signature hidden in the underdrawing of the painting. That was the hook. Finch leaned in the old fire rekindling in his eyes. "Okay, kid, you've got my undivided attention. But to nail a man like Sterling, we need more than a book. We need a public stage, and we need a cannonball of irrefutable proof to fire from it." "I have the stage," Clara said instantly, the plan that had been forming in her mind, now crystallizing. "In 2 weeks, Sterling is hosting his annual Patron's Heart Gala. It's his biggest night of self-promotion, and the auction centerpiece this year is a charcoal sketch, a supposed study for the alchemist's daughter." Finch let out a low, appreciative whistle. The sheer, unmitigated gall. He's not just polishing his trophy, he's selling tickets to see it. It's the perfect stage for an implosion. He paused, his gaze hardening. "But what's the cannonball? The signature you mentioned is on the actual painting, which is hanging in his penthouse. We need to see it. We need forensic quality images." The challenge seemed insurmountable. Sterling's penthouse was a fortress, but a sly, calculating smile spread across Arthur's face. His ego may be his undoing. He's desperate for legitimacy. So desperate he just hired a new private curator to catalogue his collection. A brilliant but hopelessly naive academic named Dr. Alistair Finch. Clara stared. "Finch?" "My nephew," Arthur confirmed with a grimace, "thinks his Uncle Arthur is a journalistic troglodyte. But he's family, and he's about to unwittingly help us commit a beautiful act of sabotage." The plan they hatched was as simple as it was audacious. Arthur would leverage a vague family obligation to have Alistair hire a specialist for his cataloguing project. Clara would become Anna, a freelance art photographer and research assistant with a stellar and fabricated portfolio. Her sole mission, infiltrate the lion's den and capture high-resolution, multispectral images of the forgery's hidden signature. The next 10 days were a blur of transformation. Clara shed the skin of the waitress and the grieving daughter. Using the last of her funds, she acquired a new uniform, understated intellectual, and expensive enough to pass muster. She spent hours in the New York Public Library, refreshing her knowledge on art forensics and photographic techniques, becoming Anna in mind, as well as appearance. In a moment of calculated risk, she sent a heavily encrypted message to Dr. Isabella Rossi, her father's most trusted colleague in Florence, a world-renowned expert in pigment analysis. The message was simple. "Found father's notes. Proof is coming. Stand by." The reply was instantaneous for Jean-Luc, always. The day of the visit, a knot of pure ice formed in Clara's stomach. Arthur met her for coffee, his usual cynicism replaced by a paternal concern. "Remember you are Anna," he coached. "Professional, quiet, detached. Sterling will be there preening over his possessions. He is your target, but he cannot know it. Get the pictures and get out." Sterling's penthouse was exactly as she'd imagined, a sterile monument to wealth on Billionaire's Row. It was less a home than a private gallery of financial conquests, with masterpieces by Rothko and Bacon hanging like hostages on vast white walls. And there, dominating the central living space, was the beautiful lie itself, the alchemist's daughter. Seeing it in person sent a jolt through her, a mixture of revulsion and awe at the forger's skill. Damien Sterling, dressed in a ludicrously expensive cashmere tracksuit, greeted them with the bored air of a king receiving tribute. Arthur's nephew Alistair, a nervous young man swimming in a tweed jacket, made the introductions. "Mr. Sterling, this is Anna, the photographic documentarian I hired. Her work is first-rate." Sterling's cold, reptilian eyes swept over Clara. It was a moment of supreme terror. Would he see her, the waitress from Ethelgard? The woman who had gutted his pride with a few perfectly spoken words of French? He saw nothing. He saw a plain, scholarly woman who posed no threat, another hired hand to be ignored. "Fine," he grunted, already turning back to a massive screen displaying stock tickers. "Alistair, supervise her. Make sure she doesn't touch anything." The dismissal was a gift. It allowed Clara to fade into her role. With trembling insides but rock-steady hands, she began her work methodically photographing several pieces to establish her cover. She could feel Sterling watching her intermittently from across the room, his gaze not one of suspicion, but of smug ownership, as an expert validated his collection. The irony was suffocating. She saved The Alchemist's Daughter for last. Given its provenance, I'll need to use multispectral imaging to create a full record for the insurance catalogue, she explained to Alistair, her voice a flat, academic monotone. "Brilliant, of course," he replied, eager to contribute. This was the moment. She adjusted her powerful camera and tripod fitting the infrared lens. She focused on the sleeve of the girl's dress, the very spot her father's journal had described. Through the viewfinder, the painted surface was opaque. But on her camera's small digital screen, which processed the infrared light, the ghostly underdrawing began to appear. Her heart hammered. And then she saw it. Faint but absolutely clear. A specific geometric cross-hatching pattern in the folds of the fabric, a stylistic tick as unique as a fingerprint. It was the forger's signature. She had him. She took a dozen shots from every conceivable angle her movements practiced, and calm. The evidence was now digital, captured secure. She downloaded the files to an encrypted drive and then wiped the camera's memory card clean as Alistair looked on oblivious. As she packed her gear, Sterling sauntered over, a proprietary gleam in his eye. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, gesturing to the painting. "My Vermeer." The temptation to strike, to wipe that smirk off his face with a single sentence, was overwhelming. But she held his gaze, her face a perfect mask of professional detachment. She was Anna. "It's a most compelling painting, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "A truly fascinating subject for technical analysis." It was the perfect, bloodless response music to his arrogant ears. He nodded, satisfied that his possession had been appropriately admired, and dismissed her with a wave. Clara walked out of that penthouse and into the New York afternoon, the encrypted drive in her pocket feeling like a detonator. She had walked into the heart of her enemy's fortress, looked him in the eye, and stolen the secret that would bring his entire world crashing down. The ghost had gathered her proof. Now it was time to set the stage for the haunting. The fortnight leading to the Patron's Heart Gala was a period of intense, focused activity. Arthur Finch's bookstore, The Final Word, transformed from a dusty sanctuary of old knowledge into a clandestine war room. The air, usually thick with the scent of aging paper, now crackled with conspiracy, and the hum of a laser printer churning out evidence. The encrypted drive containing the images from Sterling's penthouse was their primary asset, and they prepared to leverage it with the precision of a military strike. The first move was to send the multispectral images to Dr. Isabella Rossi in Florence. Working through secure channels, the fiercely loyal art historian analyzed the data with a passion fueled by her belief in Jean-Luc Moreau's innocence. The report she sent back less than 72 hours later was more than just a confirmation. It was an executioner's warrant. Dr. Rossi's analysis not only corroborated the chemical anomalies in the pigments her father had first noted, but it also presented a side-by-side comparison of the infrared underdrawing from The Alchemist's Daughter with known works by a specific 20th century forger. The match was perfect, the stylistic signature undeniable. Her conclusion was stated with absolute scientific certainty. The painting was a modern fake. The cannonball was now forged and ready. While Clara absorbed the report, steeling her resolve, Arthur worked his own magic. He became a ghost in the machine, calling in favors from a lifetime of journalistic integrity. He prepared a comprehensive press kit containing Dr. Rossi's findings, key excerpts from Jean-Luc's journal, and a timeline of the original scandal ready for instantaneous digital release. He made discreet calls to trusted contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office, not revealing his hand, but advising them to pay very close attention to Damien Sterling's gala auction. Think of it as a potential philanthropic anomaly, he'd said, his voice laced with intrigue. His final preparations involved coaching Clara. You cannot go in there as a vengeful daughter, he instructed her, pacing the cramped back room. Emotion is Sterling's weapon. He will paint you as hysterical. You must be cold, factual, and unshakable. You are not there to accuse. You are there to present incontrovertible facts. You are an art historian just like your father. You will honor him with his own weapon, the truth. Clara understood. This required one last transformation. She couldn't be the waitress nor the timid academic, Anna. She had to embody the legacy Sterling had tried to erase. With the funds from Mr. Dubois and a loan from Arthur, she procured her armor, a vintage sapphire blue silk gown. It was a statement of timeless elegance, not fleeting wealth. Her hair was swept into a graceful chignon, her only jewelry a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. When she looked at her reflection, she saw the woman she was meant to be, her stormy eyes, burning with a purpose that left no room for fear. The night of the gala, the Temple of Dender at the Metropolitan Museum, was a shimmering spectacle of performative charity. The air was heavy with expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory chatter of New York's elite. Clara moved through the crowd, a ghost of their world they failed to recognize. They saw only an elegant stranger, not the daughter of the man they had so easily condemned. She saw them for what they were, courtiers to a hollow king. And there was the king himself, Damien Sterling, holding court near the stage. He was incandescent with pride, accepting praise for his generosity, his trophy girlfriend Isabel glittering with diamonds on his arm. He looked untouchable, a man so insulated by his wealth he believed himself immune to consequence. Clara took a glass of champagne, the cool stem grounding her. She found Arthur near the edge of the room, looking wonderfully out of place in his rumpled suit. He gave her a single, sharp nod. The signal. After a series of fawning speeches, Sterling took the stage himself, bathing in the warm glow of the spotlight and applause. "It is the greatest honor of my life to support the arts," he purred into the microphone. "And in that spirit I am delighted to offer a truly special piece from my personal collection for tonight's auction." An assistant unveiled the charcoal sketch, The Study for the Alchemist's Daughter. The auctioneer began his rapid-fire chant, and the bidding war commenced. It was a frenzy of ego hands shooting up across the room, the price climbing into the hundreds of thousands. With every bid the lie was reinforced, Sterling's fraud gilded with another layer of public validation. He watched a smug smile plastered on his face. This was his moment of ultimate triumph. The bidding hit $500,000. "Sold to the gentleman in the third row." The auctioneer was about to cry, his gavel raised. "Wait!" The word, though spoken at a normal volume, sliced through the hall's acoustics with the clarity of a ringing bell. The gavel froze mid-air. The auctioneer faltered. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd as every head turned to find the source of the interruption. Clara Moreau stepped out from the shadows of a column, the light catching the deep blue of her dress. She moved forward, her gaze locked on the man on the stage. Sterling squinted, annoyed. "I'm sorry, madam, this is a private event." "I am aware," Clara said, her voice steady and resonant as she continued her deliberate walk towards the stage. The crowd instinctively parted for her. "My name is Clara Moreau." The name landed with the force of a physical blow. A collective gasp followed by an explosion of whispers swept the room. Moreau, Jean-Luc Moreau's daughter. Sterling's face, which had been a mask of smug satisfaction, turned to chalk. The blood drained from his face as he stared at the ghost who had come to haunt his feast. "I am Jean-Luc Moreau's daughter," she announced, her voice rising to fill the sudden silence. "And as an art historian, I have a professional and moral duty to inform everyone here of the true nature of the item you are bidding on." "Security," Sterling hissed, his composure shattering. "Remove this woman immediately. She's deranged." 2 guards started towards her, but Arthur Finch moved to intercept them, flashing his old press credentials like a shield. "She has a right to be heard," he stated with quiet authority. Clara paid them no mind. Her entire focus was on Sterling. "This sketch," she declared, pointing a graceful hand towards the easel, "is not a glimpse into the mind of a 17th century master. It is a modern accessory to an elaborate multi-million-dollar fraud." "You're insane," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "A bitter girl trying to slander my name to avenge your criminal father." "My father was not a criminal," Clara shot back, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "He was a man of integrity who was silenced. He was framed by the one person who stood to lose everything if the real truth came out. A man who had already committed massive fraud by pre-selling shares in a painting he was privately being warned was a fake. That man was you, Mr. Sterling." She raised her phone, and on the large screens flanking the stage, an image appeared, a page from her father's journal, his elegant script detailing his suspicions. As the crowd murmured, she swiped, and the next image appeared, the stark black and white infrared photograph of the sleeve, the forger's unique cross-hatching, circled in red. "My father knew the forger had left a signature, a stylistic tick hidden beneath the paint," she explained, her voice clinical and precise. A signature he was about to expose. "This is it." The next slide was a side-by-side comparison from Dr. Rossi's report, placing the infrared image next to a known sample from the 20th century forger. The patterns were identical. This is not Vermeer. It is a lie authenticated by a report from one of the world's leading experts, Dr. Isabella Rossi. Sterling was cornered, his face slick with sweat. "Lies. This is all fake doctored images, slander." He roared, but his denials were hollow, drowned out by the weight of the evidence on the screens. "Is it?" Clara asked softly. And then came the final devastating blow. From the side of the stage, a pale, trembling figure emerged. It was Alistair Finch, Arthur's nephew, his face a mask of horrified resolution, held up a tablet. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice shaking but clear enough for the microphone to catch. "Your own financial records, which I am charged with maintaining, show a payment of $2 million to a shell corporation. The payment was made 2 days before Dr. Moreau was publicly accused. That shell corporation has been traced back to the firm that produced the fraudulent authentication report used to frame him. If the art historical evidence was a dagger, this was the poison on its tip. The accusation was no longer just about a fake painting. It was about conspiracy wire fraud and a criminal plot to destroy an innocent man. The entire room erupted. The facade of civility crumbled. Sterling stood alone on the stage, a pariah under the hot lights, his powerful friends physically recoiling from him. His empire of lies had dissolved in a matter of minutes. As he stood there, speechless and exposed, the main doors of the hall swung open. 2 uniformed officers and 2 detectives in sharp suits entered not with urgency, but with the calm, inexorable purpose of fate. They walked directly towards the stage, their eyes fixed on one man. Clara watched them approach. She felt no elation, only a profound, solemn quiet. Her quest was over. The sword she had forged from truth had done its work. The ghost had finally brought the monster into the light. In the end, it wasn't a clash of titans. It was a story of quiet, unyielding truth against loud, hollow arrogance. Clara Moreau, the woman Damien Sterling saw as nothing, became his everything, his judge, his jury, and the architect of his downfall. Sterling was arrested that night, his empire collapsing under the weight of dozens of fraud investigations. The name Jean-Luc Moreau was not only cleared, but celebrated his genius and integrity finally vindicated. Clara, no longer a waitress or a ghost, used her family's reclaimed legacy to establish a foundation dedicated to fighting art fraud and supporting artists, ensuring no one would suffer the way her father did. Her story is a powerful reminder that wealth can build palaces, but it can never build character. True power lies not in what you have, but in who you are and the courage you have to defend it. If you are cheering for Clara's incredible victory, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story of justice served cold. Let us know in the comments what you think was the most satisfying moment of Damien Sterling's downfall. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of unexpected heroes and righteous revenge.